Okay, I probably shouldn't admit I haven't watched your show before, but your intro is amazing.
Dude, thank you so much. That's my buddy DB Rook. He's a self-published author. That's his band Terminal Sun. Yes, dude. That's incredible. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Beard of Darkness Book Reviews. I have on a gentleman that I'm extremely honored to be talking with, a author to me, who I know has been around for a little while, and most people who's not such a rookie like me in this fantasy literature game. But it just blew me away, this latest release that we'll talk about. And it's honestly such a refreshing read. It did it for me in every single sense of the word. How are you tonight, Django Wexler?
I'm doing great. It's been a fun week or so.
I'll bet. So the official drop date was
the 21st. So
21st.
And it's been a little busy, but not too bad.
So this obviously not your very first release.
No.
How does that go for you typically? So let's say today is release day. How does your day start and what goes on?
It's actually kind of surprising sometimes how little happens on release day, unless we've scheduled some kind of in-person event for like literally the day of. I often spend most of my time on like social media, doing Twitter and whatever. I like to drop by my local bookstore. This time they'd actually sold most of their copies before I got there to sign them.
Awesome.
So I signed some copies and then go out for lunch. But like we have a live event coming up, but it's not until like June 4th, and I'll go and do an event and sign some copies there. There's stuff like this, interviews and so on, but often not day of. They sort of trickle in over the next couple of weeks. So I've stopped being surprised by it, but it definitely happens that like, hey, it's this big day, but like nothing actually happens.
I've heard that, and starting to think of that process just as somebody who talks to you lovely authors who drop such great information that I'm always thrilled to talk to. The thing is you create hype for a book. Unless you are sent an arc or you're a reviewer, etc., you haven't read the book. So there's not a lot of reviews yet. People, you know what I mean? So I can imagine that release day, those who are excited about it, grab it. And then there must be some sort of like wave, right? It's like it goes down a little bit, and then the reviews and things start coming in. It's like, okay, now we're starting. Now is what people think the release day would be like.
Because most people don't just like churn through a book in one day. Like some books, it happens, but like it's not like when a movie comes out where like everybody goes to see it the night of, and like 2 hours later the whole internet is buzzing.
Like instant feedback.
It takes a while to get through a book.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the film too, because the feedback from a book, the feedback from a movie, like you said, that can be digested in one sitting. Could be very quick to where with, being an author, books take a little while to get through. Waiting for that to start trickling in, I'm sure is something you have to kind of get used to as an author when you release a new book.
Yeah, you also don't have a lot of good metrics, like in terms of like sales and like popularity and stuff. You don't often get like real numbers for months. Like you'd be shocked. It's
so like from your publisher, you mean?
Yeah, well, because it's got to trickle up from like every Barnes and Noble in America has to tell you how many they sold. There's like the New York Times bestseller lists, but that doesn't most books obviously don't get on there, and like much of the time you're kind of guessing. You can see the Amazon sales rank, you can get some numbers from BookScan, but like you don't really know anything until a long time from now. So it's not like the movies where it like it gets to be like Saturday night and they're like, oh, we're on a course for a disappointing weekend, or like this is shit. They can already tell you, like, we have no idea.
And that makes sense, getting those numbers, getting a consent, getting things cohesive isn't as fast. I like that. Those are those little pieces of gold that I like to say on my channel that takes experience and somebody kind of asking the question. And it's such good information because some people like myself would wonder, hey, what's this like? So I appreciate you sharing it with me. So where do you hail from tonight?
I'm in Redmond, Washington. I've been here since 2007 or so. I guess not in this house, but in the Seattle area.
Beautiful. Do you like it out there? Too much rain?
I love it here.
I've never been.
It's like perfect weather for me. We get 3 months of beautiful sunshine in the summer, and then it rains the rest of the year. But it's never like that cold. I grew up in New York, and I went to school in Pittsburgh. And if I never have to shovel snow again, I'll be a happy camper. We often get a couple of days of snow here in Seattle, but like it melts by the next day or the next week at worst. It's not like in Pittsburgh, it would fall in November and be there till April. It's awful.
Yeah. Lake Erie is a beast, right?
Yeah. Pittsburgh. When I moved here, everyone was always like, oh, Seattle, doesn't it rain all the time? And I'm like, it can't be worse than Pittsburgh. Because
Timothy says, what part of New York?
Fewer sunny days than any major city in the U.S.
Wow, I didn't know that.
At some point.
Wow.
Someone asked what part of New York. I'm from Dobbs Ferry. It's in Westchester. So I grew up in Westchester County. It's the sort of little town where everyone's parents commute to the city to work, basically. A lot of train commuting.
That's where Timothy's at. He's in New York. Brian D. Anderson. Good to see you, my friend. Couldn't miss Django Wexler. Of course not, man. Absolutely. Thank you for being here, brother. So Washington. Why I want to come for a couple reasons up that way. I was born in California on an Air Force base. There's no memory. I don't recall anything.
I was born in San Francisco, but we moved when I was 3. I don't remember it at all.
Look at that. And again, I wish I had some sort of memory of it, but I don't. My dad was in the military in the Air Force. So when I write my birthplace, it's Edwards Air Force Base, California. It's like 4 sentences.
Mm-hmm.
But I would love to go back to that side of the states because I'm actually in the middle. I'm like an hour away from Columbus, Ohio, in a little town which was the first capital of Ohio called Chillicothe.
Huh? I didn't know that.
So I'm kind of a geek for culture and location and geography. So yeah, I always ask where are people coming from, and it's so cool because our day-to-days we're like, this could become mundane, but your day-to-day looks different, the weather's different, and I love to hear about that. So I always like to start in this realm here that I'm going to start with because it really paints a good picture for me, and I hope the audience as well. How did your relationship or love for the written word literature begin, and how did you know you were falling in love with it? Man, it's funny because I've been asked this question before, but I honestly don't know because I think it happened before I can remember. I learned to read pretty young, according to my parents, and just like reading books has just been my thing since 6 or 7 years old. I've always been a big reader. I was the sort of weird kid in school who would rather sit in the library and read rather than hang out with friends. And so that's always been a big part of my life. When I was in my early teens, I fell in love with science fiction and fantasy. And that's kind of been what I've been doing ever since. At first, mostly science fiction. I was a big sort of golden age SF person, have like complete works of Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and Ray Bradbury and all that stuff. Was what I kind of cut my teeth on there. Everything we had at my local library. Yeah, it's funny. I completely skipped what passed for young adult literature at the time, which was terrible. Like, I don't know, those of you who are younger than me, like the sort of pre-Harry Potter world of YA was not good. There were some books that
hold up, but a lot of them weren't like shelved in the YA category. Like Tamara Pierce, for example, was just in fantasy. Madeline L'Engle was usually just like in science fiction. The books that were actually supposedly targeted at kids were like, we used to joke it was, or rather I often joke, it's like long series by hack writers like the Hardy Boys or the Babysitters Club.
Yeah.
And then Newbery Award winning books about dead dogs. Because like, man, the dogs take it real hard. Any book with a medal on the cover, that dog is going down, as the joke goes.
I love it, and I think you touch on a great point. Another thing that I nerd out about is history, and it's now there's such a this is YA. This is labeled. It's on the spine of the book, and I've heard a lot of other authors say it like you did. It's like, I grew up reading fantasy. Like, it wasn't YA, it wasn't this or that, it was fantasy. Like, that's the genre it was placed in. Is that similar to your experience?
Yeah, I mean, and basically what happened is that Harry Potter happened, and it convinced the publishing powers that be that kids will buy books if they're fun, and they will spend an unfathomable amount of money on it. And so obviously everybody wanted in, and so the whole publishing apparatus reconfigured itself around that fact. Our sort of modern YA genre dates to the post Harry Potter world, and then it was shaped by various other big hits, Hunger Games and Twilight and so on along the way.
That is my experience as far that I was born in 1990, so Harry Potter was huge. Like, that's so referencing a time pre Harry Potter is something that is not something I have experience with, and I like to hear about it. It was huge for me, though. I remember in third grade, Miss Cuvion's class, she read Harry Potter, the first book, Sorcerer's Stone. I remember just loving it.
The awkward thing is, when I went to write middle grade books, I kept asking my editor what things were appropriate, and she's like, well, just think of the books you read when you were 12. And I'm like, you mean like Dune? Like,
Yeah.
Like, I was both ahead of the curve in some sense, but there also just like wasn't the middle grade genre at the time.
She was like, I have to tidy up my recommendation, right? Because I love that, though. That's your experience. And Dune is one that I hate to say this, and I hate it because I wanted to love it. I love the movies. I tried Dune and I had to set it down. I might go back to it just because I'll tell you why. And I've read, Backer's, I can't remember the name of the first book.
Thousandfold Thought.
No, the darkness.
Darkness That Comes Before.
The Darkness That Comes Before. Very one you have to digest. It's complex. There's multi-layered. Characters are written, I believe, very well, but also very complex with themes and characteristics I had to digest. So it wasn't that it was too complex, but Frank's, I'm saying Frank like he's my buddy. His writing is, I don't know any other way to explain it, but it was different from what I've read.
Dune is weird by modern standards. I actually reread it fairly recently. And it has a bunch of stuff that we don't necessarily do anymore, or at least is not mainstream. I don't know how mainstream it was at the time. That's before my time. But
like writing practices?
What, like, for example, he's changing point of view constantly in the middle of scenes and paragraphs. So he'll often give us a conversation and tell us, okay, Paul was thinking this, and then Duke Leto says something, and okay, he's thinking this. And that's not something we teach people to do anymore. It's not a common technique. And so it's just conventions have changed, but also I think, it was also pretty weird at the time. Like, Dune was a weird book. You're muted, by the way.
Yeah, sometimes the baby will. Yeah, it's funny. We have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 1-year-old, and an 8-month-old. I've gotten very familiar with the mute button. Yeah, dude, my wife is awesome. When I'm doing this, she does such a great job.
We just have a 2-year-old. She's upstairs.
It's amazing being a dad. It is, but it's
fantastic.
It's so tell me if you agree with this statement. Like, our parents, our grandparents, friends, family, whatever it is, try to prepare you with these, wait till you have a kid. There's no way, even if you took every single piece of advice that they said so serious, which I didn't, it just wasn't important. It's not happening today in my life. So I've got things to do, this and that. But even if I did, it's not going to prepare you. Like, not until you're actually a dad, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of that is just that, like, kids are different, man. Every kid is different. And, we've seen a little bit of this just, taking our daughter to meet with other people, other sort of friends and their kids. And so, what you do with one that worked great is just not always going to work with the others.
That's the coolest thing I've got to witness, having 4 beautiful children. I have 3 boys, and we finally had our girl. She's 8 months old. Every single one of them, even if they have some things in common, are so different.
As my wife and I often say, no plan survives contact with the enemy. So this is a Clausewitz, but yes, it also applies to children. So you can make all the plans you want pre-children, and they will not respect them. And
their objective is different.
To do other things.
Yeah, their objective is different. And if you think that you can, like, nail it on the head, it's most of the time, I know I'm wrong. It's like, okay, he smacked me, I got mad, but all he was trying to do was say, hey, daddy, look, and I didn't hear him before. He has you know what I mean? Their wants and their way of communicating, because they don't know how to, these emotions. Oh, I feel them, but what does this mean? How do I tell people? How do I display it? It's quite complex, but it's so cool to watch and watch them grow and become educated. And I like when I see aspects that mirror me, right?
Yeah, it's fantastic. Like, I'm so grateful that I have this job where I can stay home all the time. I sit in my basement and write, and then I get to spend a lot of time with her, which obviously can be a little exhausting, but it's so much fun.
Absolutely. 2 absolutely true things. So if you would, man, go into the new release. We all know the name, but if you would say the name again, the series, give a little bit of an overview, the feel of it.
So this is How to Become the Dark Lord and Die Trying. It's about a young woman, kind of, named Davi, who has been stuck in a time loop for 1,000 years, in which she is chosen by a famous wizard to save the kingdom from the Dark Lord. And she always tries this, and she always loses and dies, and then returns to the beginning and starts over. She came to the fantasy kingdom from Earth at some point in the distant past, so long ago that she doesn't even really remember. And she's finally fed up after a particularly bad round of it, and decides that for once she's going to go and become the Dark Lord herself, to join the winning team. And that's where we start off. And she goes off.
It's like you've done that before.
What?
It's like you've done that before. That was wonderful.
Just a couple of times.
That was like, if I could have specified, not that I needed to, because you're a pro at this. Hey, don't do anything spoiler at all, but give a good. That was it, man. Perfect.
There we go.
And a little bit of insight. I was so blessed to be able to read this as an arc, and it had, like, at 3 a.m, had me laughing, but it wasn't just humor. Like, the adventure give me the feeling in my stomach I get with epic fantasy. Weird. I don't know. Maybe this isn't weird, but I felt like it was somewhat like, I don't want to say a video game, but a video game. Like, I've played games that are very similar to that. Not that it had that exact feel to it, but it was like a predetermined video game that I enjoyed just getting lost in. And the humor was absolutely out of this world hilarious.
There's some video game aspects to it, because, like, the the time loop, the sort of you die and start over thing, like that is a video game. Like
Yeah.
I remember someone saying that they should make a video game out of that Tom Cruise movie, Edge of Tomorrow, and they were like, we don't need to make a video game. Like that's just what video games are. Like you start from your save point and you move forward, and then you die and you start over. And that's kind of a video game universe. So it's that experience.
So, how long have you had this book written? Is it somewhat of a new written book? Have you had it in the archive for a while? And what were the inspirations?
I wrote it like 2.5 years ago, I want to say.
Yeah, recent.
But it's not, and the delay is longer than usual, but it's not because it was archived. It's just, pandemic stuff, basically.
Oh, yeah.
It's more like 1 to 1.5 years is a pretty typical wait from the point at which I turn in a finished book to the point it comes out. But this one took longer because there was, various shenanigans around the end of pandemic. There were paper shortages and all that stuff. So it just got delayed a little bit. So it felt like a really long wait to get to share it with everyone, which is a little frustrating, but I'm so glad to be here now.
I'm sure that would be frustrating, things out of your control coming up, but obviously very passionate and excited to get this out. And then these things that you can't control happening. I could see why that's very, very frustrating.
Welcome to publishing, though. That's the whole thing is things that are out of your control.
So I've heard, yeah. But where did the idea come from? Where were you like, what, this has to be something I write?
There's a couple of different places. I've been kicking around an idea for a long time about the sort of protagonist of one of these save the world stories who's just like completely over it and has done this a million times in various different forms. And then this one specifically, I was watching a lot of anime, and the anime has been on an isekai kick, which is this sort of alternate world stories where people get taken from regular Earth to a fantasy world, and a lot of them have kind of video game elements. And I was like, I kind of want to do that as a book, and so I combined that with the girl who saves all the worlds, and that got me much of the way there. I pitched it, for those of you who know anime, I pitched it as So I'm a Spider, So What crossed with ReZero, if those words mean anything to you. Wait, I had one more thing to say. It's gone now. My brain is a sieve sometimes. The voice. I wrote in Ashes of the Sun, there's a character named Kit who was just a blast to write because she's kind of this like psychopath. Psychopath pixie dream girl is like one way of describing her. And so I was like, I kind of want to give a character like that her own book. And I read a couple of really sort of voicey books. If you haven't read Aidan Truan's The Price You Pay, go read it. It's fantastic.
The Price You Pay.
And reading that, I was like, man, I got to do something like that. Which is often the way I get ideas, is like I read something that I really love and I'm like, ooh, I should do not just like a wholesale copy of a book. Like The Price You Pay is about a crazed coke dealer's rampage of revenge. But like an element, like a voice or a character or a relationship that I'm like, ooh, I should do that sometime.
I'm very happy that Ashes in the Sun is going to be my next book of yours, by the way. That just excited the heck out of me. Pitch that again, a pixie dream girl that's a little psychopathic.
Yeah, well, like you have the manic pixie dream girl of sort of Hollywood fame. It's like that, except that she's constantly telling you to murder people. And I'm
in.
Yeah,
I am in. So I love hearing those inspiration stories. So when it comes to anime, as you know now, Rookie. My very first anime was very, very new. It was the Blue-Eyed Samurai. Absolutely loved it. I loved it. It was very unique, and incorporated like some political, well, a lot of political points,
Mhm.
especially for that time. And it did it in such a cool way, in creative way. Have you seen it?
Mhm.
Where should I go next?
Oh Lord. Um, I'm a little out of the loop anime wise. It strongly depends on what you like. I mean, anime is its own medium, and it
Yeah,
has as many different sort of subgenres as like books do.
I had no
Um,
idea.
so yeah, it goes on forever. Um, it you I could just name a bunch of classics, but you really have to like narrow it down a little better. That's like
I'll,
saying, I loved a book. What other book should I read? Right? Like, there's a
can
lot
you
of
name
books.
two of your favorites?
Two of my favorites.
Yeah.
I've been watching anime for a long time. Uh, my canonical favorite anime is Madoka Magica, which is a sort of deconstruction of magical girls, which is just wonderful and will probably never be equaled. Um, I don't know what's another great one I was thinking about recently. Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann is like the kind of like ultimate ode to like giant robots, and it's Studio
Wow.
Trigger, and they do like amazing work. So,
So
um, their new one, Dungeon Meshi, is like really popular, and I love
the
that.
next time I bring the topic of anime up, I think what I'm going to do before then, what I mean is kind of sample some things that work for me, because again, I had no idea it was such a broad
Yeah, I mean,
topic.
it's probably hard to do on the air, but you feel free to email me. I'll give you some recommendations based on like what kind of things you want.
Excellent. I certainly will. So my wife actually came up with this question, and I think it's incredible. Um, Here it is. How did, and I hope this makes sense. I'm not a wordsmith yet. After I talk to a million of wonderful people like you, I will be, hopefully. How did the first piece of writing, the first book that you wrote that was edited and whatnot, that you wanted to publish, gain traction, or was it a publication? Have you always been a published author?
Um, I started out just writing stuff for fun for the internet, basically. Um, I tried to get a couple of short stories published, and that didn't go anywhere. And so I got into fan fiction, and I did a lot of fan fiction writing when I was young, and that was great. It was fun, a fun and easy way um, to get practice and feedback. And then at some point, I decided I wanted to write something for publication because I had been reading about how that worked, and I thought, why not? I'm writing it anyway. It didn't seem like that much extra work. And so I wrote a novel called Memories of Empire, which I sent around to a bunch of publishers. Didn't get a lot of interest, but it was I eventually got one person to say yes at a company called Medallion Press, which no longer exists.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know it at the time, but they were kind of like a weird indie press. So I think they paid me $500. This is when I was, God, I don't even know, 22. And the book came out, and every so often I'll meet someone who read it, but like mostly it's been forgotten. I did one more book with them, Shinigami, which has also largely been forgotten. And then I moved to Seattle, and that kind of disrupted my writing for a long time. And I finally kind of got back to it, and I wrote The Thousand Names, which I think of as my first like real published book. It's the first one that came out from like a big deal publisher that people have actually heard of. And it, got into, bookstores and generally kind of made a splash. And that's also the first book where I had an agent. So the big breakthrough there was signing an agent. who I'm still with, who is wonderful. And that's kind of where I started off doing it for money.
I wanted a better way to say, have you ever self-published, or have you always had a publisher? And nowadays that's very that answer varies, right?
Yeah.
So I think that story in particular, because so you said an indie press, like a smaller press, you mean? Like
yeah.
Okay.
Not a big five publisher, not one of the big New York publishing companies.
And now you're with the wonderful Orbit.
Although I mean, I've always been all over the place. I have another book coming out in a week or two, June 4th, which is with it's a D&D book from Random House. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and I have one coming out later this year that's with Podium, which is an audio primary publishing.
That is incredible.
I've always kind of moved around to as best I can. I write pretty fast, and so sometimes I've had to work with two publishers so that I can publish the books that I'm writing, which helps make a living.
Yeah.
In the past, it's often been one adult publisher and one kids publisher, because I did a middle grade series and a YA series.
I think that is incredible. That's a very unique story, because it's tailored in a way, like the way you put it was, I write pretty fast. I work with multiple at the same time. There's audiobook in there. Podium, which huge, right? Random House, huge. So I feel like you come from a very unique point of view. How has that has to be? So I guess I'm losing my words a little bit here, but me as somebody who wants to eventually publish my own book, whether it's self or published, I can just imagine that's a dream come true. Like, is that what you always wanted to do? Like when you were finally, hey, I'm with a bigger publisher, I'm doing what I want to do. How did that feel for you? Was that always the dream?
I never thought I would do this for a living. I always thought this would be a hobby, that I would produce books, and if I could get them published, that would be great, but I would always have a real job. My training is as a software engineer. So I worked at Microsoft for 5 years. I worked in artificial intelligence research before that. And so it's always, I've always wanted to get books published, but I never really thought of it as a job. But after we got 1,000 Names signed and we got some foreign rights deals for it, and then Forbidden Library, I was like, I'm going to make as much from this as I am from my job at Microsoft, and I'd rather do this. So I quit Microsoft, which was probably financially, if I'd stayed at Microsoft, I'd be better off, but it's been a lot more fun this way.
Do you think that having that incredible fallback, right? It wasn't ever a fallback for you. It kind of took off, your writing took off, but you also were at this incredible place in the job space. Do you think that took a lot of weight off of when you did start to write books for a living, knowing that you could go back and do what you were doing?
Yes. And the thing I always tell people when they're like, how do I get to be a professional writer? I'm like, you got to write books, but you also have to be in a situation that's sustainable. Because, between the point at which I started working in software and when I could quit my job and do work, there's like 10 years, right? If I had just been like trying to write books and live as a starving artist, I would have like gone crazy or given up. Like there's no way. So, find something you can do that will support yourself and like won't drive you insane. Some kind of sustainable situation, because you just don't want to be in the situation where you're like, okay, I got to have a big hit in the next 2 years or I run out of money, or, I got to go back and live with my parents or whatever. It's
solid,
because that may not happen. So much of it is out of your control. You send it to publishers and to agents, and they may bite and they may not. And so,
I think that's an incredible piece of information that a lot of people, I think, need to hear, right? Because you went in with this mindset of, this is my hobby, and now you are where you are. which is incredible. But you had that also. You had that spot in the job force where it was reliable. I think that's an incredibly advantageous situation, and I appreciate you talking about it.
And it's worth saying that like I kind of tailored what I did as a job to this. Like when I came to work for Microsoft, I ended up working in a fairly sort of staid, part of it. When I was applying to jobs, I didn't go to work in Xbox, which was like new and cool at the time, or like because I'd be working overtime, right? And I would be staying at the office all day and wouldn't have time to do writing, right? And so I took a job in a part of the company which was much less kind of like the new and cool thing, but it meant I could go home at 5 o'clock.
Absolutely.
And, that's kind of, those are the kind of choices that you make.
I think that those were incredibly advantageous spots to be in. My guy Brian says, given the various publishing options available and several A-listers diverging from the traditional model, most notably Sanderson, have you considered new publishing methods?
To a certain extent. I mean, the thing about Sanderson that method, his sort of Kickstarter stuff, is not available to most people. Most of us are not even close to the level of fame, because that just like relies on having a huge platform to just get the word out there. It's surprisingly difficult. Like, I have a Twitter, I have Blue Sky, I tell people about this stuff all the time, and you'd be shocked at the number of people that I like know personally that don't realize I have a new book out. Like, it's hard. People have a lot going on. They're not paying much attention to you. I have a newsletter, et cetera, et cetera. And so that particular method is hard. It also relies on being able to do a lot of work. Like the thing about self-publishing, and my wife self-publishes, and she's been very successful at it. But it means I get to observe firsthand. It's a lot of work, like over and above the work of producing the book. Because you've got to produce the book, and edit it, and I do all that. But then all the other stuff that goes into it is a lot. I mean, and in some sense, the barrier to entry is lower because you don't technically have to do all the work. You could just throw it up on Google or Amazon and sell 5 copies. But like, if you want to actually make a go of it, there's a lot of like hours that go into that. Obviously at Brandon's level, you have help. He has like his own corporation where people take care of the logistics of shipping $21 million worth of merchandise.
Yes.
But like to replicate that at a lower level you're taking on potentially a lot of kind of non-writing labor. Now that said, there's a lot of new publishing methods, and I'm definitely working on some. I've done some self-published stuff, kind of as bonus material. This new thing with Podium. Podium's not a traditional publishing house. They started out as audio only, doing audio versions of stuff, but now they're moving into doing their like new original material. Like they got their start as like people would self-publish a series, and then Podium would come to them and be like, hey, why don't we do an audiobook for you? But now they're doing more kind of their own original stuff, which is what my book is going to be. So I'm always exploring stuff. It's important to match your method to like where your strengths are and where you're willing to spend your time. My wife is much better at the kind of like administrative and marketing stuff than I am, and so it works much better for her to do that herself. I'm just as happy to have someone else take care of it, but that means giving up control, which is not something everybody wants to do. There's a variety of options available, and none of them are like the overall best, because it all depends on like what you can do, what you're bringing to the table, and we all have kind of different strengths and weaknesses.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful answer to that. Wow. Great question, Brian. I just learned quite a few new things just from that one question, man. Another question we have down here, Enoch 1524 says, sorry, you ain't stepping on anything, my friend. Do you typically outline? In fact, that dives into one of my questions, so that's beautiful. What's your writing process? Are you a pantser outliner? Do you have daily goals?
It's changed over time. I used to be a dedicated pantser, although I don't know if I knew that term, but I used to hate the concept of outlining. Back when I wrote Thousand Names, and Thousand Names took me about 5 years to write. Because I kept starting and stopping and starting over. I started over so many times. And so I finally wrote it. And other authors will speak to this also. There's a problem with your sophomore book, the book after the first one. And the problem is, generally, when you're trying to get your first book published, the book is done, right? You polish it as best as you can. You take it to agents, and then the agents take it to editors. And they're like, hopefully you sell it. And they're like, great. Okay, we signed you to a 3-book deal. So where's the next book? It's due in 18 months or something. And if it took you 5 years to write the first book, the second one being due in 18 months can be a little distressing. Hopefully you adapt. And I certainly did. But in my case, because Shadow Campaigns was going to be a series, they said, well, we're going to need an outline of the whole series before we publish. And I said, oh, I don't want to do outlines. I hate doing outlines. And they said, nope, sorry, you have to do it. I said, okay. So I sat down and I did the outlines, and it was miserable. I hated doing it. But I did it, and it took me a couple months, and I turned it into them. And then later, when I sat down to write the second book, and I had the outline to work from, I couldn't help but notice how much easier it was.
Wow.
Like so much easier. Like night and day. And I was like, oh, this is why people do this. And so over time, I have become a very dedicated outliner.
I love that story.
And what I have realized is that the reason it's hard, the reason I didn't like it, is that when you're doing an outline, I'm trying to think how to explain this in a way that doesn't sound crazy. When you're writing a book, especially if you're not writing from an outline, you periodically have to make sort of difficult decisions about where to go, like what happens next, right? But like the pace at which you're writing the book isn't that fast, and so these decisions are kind of nicely spaced out. Because you say, okay, think about this. What's going to happen next? Okay, they go into the valley and there's a cave, and they go into the cave and there's a monster. Okay, so you go and you write that out, and it takes time. This is at least how it worked for me. And then you have all that time to kind of noodle over what the next plot point is. But if you're doing an outline, you decide, okay, they go into the valley, they go into the cave, they fight the monster. But like, you don't actually write that out, so it's just as fast as that. And so then immediately what you're presented with is the next decision. It's like taking the hardest part of writing and concentrating it up front.
Wow.
In a way, because you are sort of one after another hitting these critical points. And the advantage is then once you get it done, it makes the rest so much easier. And it works for me because it means when I am actually writing the book, I can concentrate more on things like language and pacing and dialogue and character rather than worrying about like the plot, because I already have that part done. And character, even to a large extent, like the character arcs are in the outline. And that sort of separation of labor just works really well for me. but that, that's why I didn't like it. So my outlines have grown and grown until they're, probably about a tenth the size of the finished book. So if the book
Oh,
is
wow.
100,000 words, my outline will be 10,000 words. That's pretty typical.
I had a similar idea in mind when I first attempted this writing thing, and pantsing, no, I cannot keep an idea or plot point cohesive through 2 pages. Literally, I would start the next day and completely forget where I had left off. So I've come to right in, I would say, a middle ground between the two. Enough plot points where I know where I'm going, where it's going to end up where I started, but give myself that creative freedom in between those plot points to work on those smaller things, like you said, like language and tone, and fit in some. You get, of course, you get what I'm saying, but
no, I
I've
always
found,
think of it like imagine a visual artist doing a sketch, right? Like, you do a sketch to get the pose right and the composition of the picture. If you ever watch a visual artist like process video, and then once you have that, then you're gonna, at some point, you're gonna need to drill down and do the like tiny fabric pattern on the person's arm. But like, you don't do that without knowing where that arm is gonna be like arranged. And a big part of the reason you don't do it is that, like, if you later decide you want to change the composition, it's a lot easier to change it in a pencil sketch than once you've done all the little delicate fish scales on the guy's armor. And that's the thing with outlines. Like,
that's great. Yes.
I can, working through something in an outline, I can hit a problem and back out and try a different approach and not lose more than a couple days work. Whereas, like, as I found with Thousand Names, if I do that with the full draft, I can lose months.
I was talking to Tilda Coldholt yesterday, and she was talking about how she had to meet in the middle of pantsing and outlining, because she would outline so incredibly detailed that one time she was writing and this character did something, and she's like, "No, that's not what I want you to do. This isn't what I had." So she had to rewrite everything. So would you say that's a good point, having experience now with the outlining side of this, make it to where it's not so incredibly detailed as well that you don't corner yourself?
You can definitely overdo an outline. I think the big skill in outlining is kind of being able to envision vaguely what the scene will look like, what the beats of a scene are going to be as you're writing down and you say, okay, they meet up and decide to do this. But like in my head, I have like some idea of what that looks like, because that kind of, if you can envision what's going to happen, it helps you find problems, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the key skill there. And that, I think, takes just like writing a few books. Like once you've written a couple of books, then you're much more aware of like, okay, when I say in my outline, this happens, like, what is that going to mean in the text? Right? If I say, oh, okay, they fight and then afterwards they have a conversation, like what does that look like?
That hits a point for me personally, because I know that beginning writing as a journey that I want to take in my life, that it takes experience. It does. It takes doing it. And there's little things like what you just said that I had to say, you're not going to be great right off the rip, because you have to earn your stripes. Basically, you get to become more comfortable with the process, and it tells you things.
Yeah, people often, one common failure mode I see for new writers is to get too caught up with whatever your first project is and try to, I'm going to make this perfect. And it seems like, why not, right? You have like all the time in the world to revise it. So, why not just work and work and work on it until it's perfect? But like, you learn things by finishing stuff. Writing stories, like, it teaches you things, and I feel like you have to work on a variety of them. And take it with a grain of salt. All writing advice is pretty personal, but like for my money, you have to work on a variety of projects before you know what you're doing, rather than just kind of revising the same one over again. Like if someone said, I have this one story that I'm really in love with, and that's what I want to tell, I might say, like, don't start with that, like, because you're not gonna get it right the first time. There's just no way. Or start with it and say, okay, I finished that, I'm putting it away, I'm going to do something else, and then later just do it again, right? Nothing says you can't write the same book twice. I guarantee you'll be better the second time. But yeah, it's, with what, for some reason, like with many other types of artists, like visual artists, nobody expects your first painting to be the best thing in the universe. Like we just kind of like accept that. But I think with books, because the work stretches out over such a long time, and because it's easy to change things, we get this idea that you can just make your first thing perfect.
You're making my hands so tired. I've never written so much in my life. You have
take it all with a grain of salt. All process is personal. Everybody's different.
I agree, but what I hear is just logical. It makes so much sense.
That's what I think. It's hard, but like when I used to do a lot of like cons, and we'd have like writing workshops at the cons, and so I'd talk to like a lot of new aspiring writers, and it's sad to me, but like one of the things that would most indicate somebody's work that they wouldn't actually sort of get anywhere with is when they say, I have this novel and I've been working on it for 10 years. I wrote my book and I'm still working on it 10 years later.
Yeah.
And like, that's tough. There's probably some people out there who work for 10 years and produce just the most absolutely brilliant thing, but not most of us.
Not likely, right?
Most of us produce a lot of bad work before getting to anything good.
I really like that bit of brilliant. I think just if you've got this passionate story that you want to tell, and you want to be a good and selling author, don't start with what you want your passion project to be. If you want to write about this subject and you're very passionate about it, write something else first. Let's hone in those the crafts and the points.
You got to be careful with that, because if that project is the reason you want to write, I don't want to kill anybody's enthusiasm. Like, do whatever gets you to do the work is the important thing. I don't want to say don't write your passion project and then people like start some project they don't care about and then they don't finish it. Like, that's not where I want to go with it. But if your goal is to be an author as opposed to just writing a single book, then you have to think in terms of like you're going to be doing more than one thing. Like, that's what authors do. And so, you gotta spread things out a little bit.
No, I think
maybe work outside your comfort zone. So it's a trade-off, because at the end of the day, everybody has, if you want to, the one thing you can't avoid is that if you want to be a writer, you have to write the stuff that's in some way, shape, or form. And so if whatever process doesn't involve you like writing the book, then you won't get there, and you should rethink your process.
I like what you said, and I didn't hear it that way at all. It's where like, oh, no, I don't want to take anybody off that path that they're passionate about. What I hear is logical information. Say, hey, I think that's great that you're passionate about subject A, but from experience, let's hone in the craft. I didn't get like, now put that to the side and forget why you're writing. I think that you hit right in the middle of those 2 points. Very well, and just for me personally, I'm speaking. That makes complete sense.
And especially don't, and because this is even more of a temptation now, don't write your passion project as your first thing and then just like slam it up on Amazon. because it's really easy to do that, and then it won't be good, and it won't sell, and you'll have poured your passion into this project that only your mom and your friends read.
So what do you mean?
Hard.
Don't just
like I don't want that for anybody.
Do you mean try getting it published, or what do you? I'm lost. Like, what do you mean? Don't just throw it up on Amazon. Make sure that things are all in order, or make sure to try to get it published.
Mean, when you self-publish something, like the problem self-publishing, the barrier to entry is really low, right? And there are so many really good self-published things, but there's also like just millions of complete nothings that nobody will ever read, because Amazon is just completely full of that stuff. And so you have to, you really have to like put in the work. So
just
what I mean is like,
because you can.
Yeah, exactly. You can technically write your first book, can use Amazon's built-in converter to make it an ebook out of your Word doc file and put it up on Amazon, and there you're done. You're a published author. And like, if all you want is to show it off to your friends, then fine. But like, if your goal is to actually get your work out there so that other people will read it, then it takes more than that.
Beautifully put. And I love that point, because having Amazon, which again, what you just said, how they got the converter is easy. This isn't the 1990s, right? Even that's pretty close to now. Don't just throw it up because you can.
In the past, like, those things would have ended up at the bottom of some slush pile, right? Like, you'd send it to an agent or a publisher, and they'd read it and pass, or not read it at all. And so now it's like we've taken out the gatekeepers, and you can bypass it, but like, you got to think about, with great power comes great responsibility. You got to think about whether you should. Somebody said that. I don't know.
This is a great yes. With great power comes great responsibility. You have the power through Amazon to just throw and get that badge. You're a published author now. But is that representing what you want it to represent? Great point. Enoch 1524 has another question. Great question. Do you have a particular writing program that you like to use or recommend? Word, Pages, etc.?
So this gets down into the weeds a little bit, but if you're doing trad publishing, you will have to at some point output Word, because the whole industry runs on MS Word. They have the sort of workflows that go from a manuscript to a finished, like literally a book, all take as input a Word file. The kind of like editing processes all use like Word comment features and all that stuff. So if you're doing trad, you are pretty much locked into using Word for at least part of that process. Now, that said, you can use whatever you want beforehand, as long as it can convert to a Word file at some point. So like Scrivener is one that a lot of people use. I'm not a devotee, but many people swear by it. And the thing it can do is you can hit compile Word file, and it will generate a Word file for you that you can send to your editor, and be done. For me, I'm comfortable in Word, so I just use it for everything. I use Notepad to keep like small notes, but like typically when I'm writing, I have like 3 or 4 different Word files open. One of them's the outline, one of them's like notes, and one of them is the actual manuscript. Word has its flaws, but it does the job, and it's industry standard.
Great information.
Yeah, you have to be careful, especially Charlie Strauss talks about being bug compatible, where like you have alternatives like LibreOffice, which are fine. And especially for just like writing the book, it's fine. You can use, when you're just typing out the manuscript, you can use anything you want. You can use, one of those little word processor machines that has its own custom, 4-line screen or whatever. You just have to push it to Word at some point, because the problem is, if you are using something that's not Word and your editor sends you back a marked up manuscript with 700 comments in it, and you go through and, like input new stuff around all those comments and like respond to them, but you're using LibreOffice and there's some kind of bug that causes it not to be readable in Word, then you are going to have wasted hundreds of hours. And this is a thing that happens on the regular because, many people are trying to sort of replicate Word, and they have their like published standard, but Charlie Strauss calls it being bug compatible, which is not only being compatible with Word in the sense that you adhere to their published standards, but that you also emulate whatever weird bugs they have that they haven't fixed. And that's a higher standard. And so, I just work in Word regardless. But for any other person, I'd say work in whatever you want. But if you're working in trad, expect to convert it to Word at some point and then use Word thereafter. Indie is different. A lot of the indie tools work with Word, but they also work with a lot of other things. I know a lot less about that world, but there's various tools you can use to actually kind of like lay out your ebook.
You could have just saved people so many heartaches.
I hope so.
Gosh, I can't imagine. I can't imagine. I could go down a rabbit hole with that. Wow.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree, Knock. Wonderful, very key, vital information, especially if you're the guy with the I'm not a savvy computer person, but with the bugs, the bug deal, I don't want no bugs.
No.
It's
tricky because like novels kind of push the limits of how big text documents like ever are. Like there aren't many text documents larger than a big novel. And so it has a tendency to strain word processing programs to their limits. A lot of programs that will work fine on, a few thousand words, when you try to get them to handle a 200,000 word system, they reveal unexpected problems.
The amount of again, I said this earlier, the gold nuggets of information, like what takes experience to know, and being willing to share that with people in such detail. And man, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm happy.
That's wonderful. What are you reading?
What am I reading? My reading time has been cut way down recently.
I can imagine.
Recently, in the last 2 years since I had a baby, it takes up a lot of time. So I'm doing a lot of audiobooks.
Yep.
I am currently reading. Oh wait, I've forgotten the title. Hang on. It's the second book in Adrian Tchaikovsky's space opera series.
Oh yeah, Children of Time, and then
no, not his other space opera. Oh. Like, Adrian Tchaikovsky, man. I love his work, and he is so prolific. I cannot keep up with it. This is The Eyes of the Void, which is his space opera with the architects that come and destroy planets. It's great. I'm really loving it. So I'm listening to that in audiobook.
I feel like
yes, I've read Children of Time. It's wonderful. He has so many wonderful books. He writes fast.
That's what I was getting at. Every time I turn around, I learn of a new Tchaikovsky book, and it's not new. Like these have been here.
Yeah.
And
when I first became aware of him, all he had out was his Shadows of the Apt series, which is 10 books long, and I'm like, man, that must have taken him forever. But like, I actually don't think it did because he writes so fast. Yeah, he's a wonderful guy. We met when last time I was in England, and he's really nice. And he was kind enough to give us a blurb for Dark Lord Davi. And so
I saw that.
That is
awesome.
Chat on Twitter. I send him all the pictures of spiders that I find because
Yes,
spiders.
That man loves. Why can't I think of the technical word?
Arachnids.
No, well,
Insects.
yeah, it's arachnid. The entomology.
He does.
Oh
He does
gosh,
indeed.
I talked to him on the channel a while back, and it was I had to tell you because we're both obviously fans of his. My kids were supposed to be at the babysitters, and they screamed the whole time, dude.
Oh
It
no.
was so embarrassing. But yeah, he is very prolific, and there's only a few authors that push me to the point, and these aren't books that I like to read a lot of, but Children of Time, like,
It's
very
great.
cool.
It's great stuff.
All right, what are you working on, and what's coming up for you? Like any conventions, book releases, anything you want to throw out there that's coming up for you?
Well, I got a bunch of stuff coming up.
Awesome.
So, as I intimated earlier, my next book, coincidentally, is coming out very close to this book. It comes out June 4th, and this is Spelljammer Spelljammer Memories Wake. Sorry, I'm reading one thing and trying to say another. Which is I don't know if you guys know anything about the Spelljammer setting, but it's D&D in space. It's a setting that came out originally when I was a teen and I fell in love with it. And so when they relaunched it, I was like, please let me do the tie-in fiction if you do tie-in fiction. And it turns out they did. So that comes out, and I'm super excited about that. I'm going to be on a bunch of different podcasts and other things around that. So if you watch my Twitter or Blue Sky, those are good places to find out about that. If you happen to be in the Seattle area, I will be at, let me get the exact details here. I will be at Third Place Books on June 5th, starting at, I think the official start is about 7 p.m. That's Third Place Books in Lake Forest. And so please, I'll be there with Erin Evans. And so she's a wonderful author, and we'll be having a conversation, and that'll be a lot of fun. So I'll be talking about both Spelljammer Memories Wake and Dark Lord Davi. And you can come and see me, and I will sign your books or whatever it is that you want. So if you're in my neck of the woods, come do that. I have another book out later this year in October. It's called Last Stop, and it's about propeller-driven airplanes and giant insects in a world where humanity can only live on the mountaintops because if you go too far down, the world is ruled by giant insects.
Yes.
And so that's a lot of fun. That's the one that's coming from Podium, so there'll be a great audio version, but there's also going to be a print version. And that's a kind of like short, pulpy novel that I'm going to hopefully do as a series. I owe them at least one more. And so that's my year. 3 releases this year is a lot of fun. I'm currently working on, I'm doing a space opera trilogy for Orbit. That's the next big thing.
No way.
And so I am currently engaged with that. It's looking kind of like a chonker, so it may take a while.
So did I say that's my new love?
What? Space opera?
Space operas. Newfound love. So to hear that, yes, sir, I am in.
Well, I hope you still like it by the time this book comes out. Dark Lord Davi 2 is in editing. So I finished the draft and the editor's working on it. And so hopefully that'll be out by next year. I mean, it'll definitely be out by next year. I don't know when in next year. They haven't set a date yet. And that'll be the end of this series. It was always kind of conceived as a duology. So that's where we're going.
I love duologies too, because it's like that perfect, if you're finishing a huge series or even a trilogy, those can be long depending on how big the books are. A duology is like, I like it enough that I want to see another book, but it's such, I guess the way I'm saying is a nice punch to the throat and whatever flavor you'd like. And sometimes, by the way, go ahead.
Sometimes people complain about middle book syndrome, which is when, like, if you try to make everything a trilogy, sometimes you really only have 2 big plot points, and so the middle book is just like, and then they kept walking for another 1,000 miles.
Yes.
And so I'm a big believer in series being the length that they need to be, and this one was 2.
Logical. That's what I've gotten so far. Everything has been very inspiration and logical. I love it. That's the way. That's my language. So much. Speaking of prolific writers, my guy, I'm speaking to one.
Thank you. Well, I had no releases 2 years ago, and I think only one last year, so they've kind of built up a little bit.
It sounds like it.
Pandemic delays. I usually shoot for about 2 a year.
That's a great number.
That's my hope. Also, if you are interested in my stuff, but have not bought a book yet, or even if you have, if you go to my website, djangowexler.com, and sign up for my newsletter, I have a novella called Horde, which is about a party of adventurers who kill a dragon and then are faced with the eternal challenge of, how do we get all this gold back to civilization? It turns out gold is really heavy. And it's a lot of fun. It's sort of lighthearted fantasy adventure novella, and you can get that free if you sign up for my newsletter. So I recommend it.
It's down here at the bottom of the screen, guys. I've checked the website out, and I was going to touch on that too. It's like you offer and give any reader what they could ever want in the website, and it's a beautiful website too. So highly suggest that.
I did not make it.
I couldn't do mine either. No way.
I have a friend who runs a little business called Clockpoke Studios. So shout out to Jeremiah Tolbert. He made the website for me, and it looks great. That was the last time I made a website. I was doing it, aligning the tables by hand in HTML, if that tells you anything about when that was.
Yeah, that's when my wife was doing it. Yeah. And she was good at that, the way things were then, and things have changed so much. She's lost, and that's when she was like, you know what?
I have not kept up with that skill set.
Yeah. That's amazing. So much fun stuff to look forward to. I always loved, I haven't asked this in a while, but I knew I wanted to ask you, who are a few people you would recommend I talk with in the future?
Who? Who should you talk with in the future?
People that maybe you look up to or like to listen to.
Who's your usual run of guests? Is it just any fantasy author? Because you probably had a bunch of the ones that I can think of.
Yeah, I also love illustrators, editors. I mean, when it comes to literature, period, but specifically fantasy or science fiction, sometimes I go outside of that, but not very often.
Have you had Anthony Ryan on? He's wonderful. Or
do you want to know why I know about how to be a Dark Lord? Him.
Was it Anthony Ryan? Okay.
Yep. He's like, hey, I'm reading this great book, and it's just, I'll say it like it's proper funny.
Ah, nice. I can't do it.
I said, what is it? And then I reached out to him.
I have a terrible British accent.
Me too.
But yeah, Anthony Ryan. Brian McClellan is wonderful.
Oh, there we go. Yes.
He does he has his own show, I think, but I'm sure he'd be around. Nick Harkaway is the guy who wrote The Price You Pay, which is not like precisely science fiction, but like read it, I guarantee you'll like it. He wrote it as Aidan Trewin, which is sometimes a little confusing. Yoon Ha Lee has written some wonderful books that and is also just like a wonderful person to talk to about a wide variety of subjects. He is like incredibly knowledgeable about like weird things, which is very similar to me, and so we've always gotten along.
Incredible. Those are 3 that I haven't had on.
There you go.
Thank you for that. Man, Django Wexler, thank you so much for letting me just kind of listen to you, really, because so many wonderful, helpful tips, advice, experience. So again, just thank you for coming and hanging out with me on the channel, and can't wait to do it again.
Yeah. let me know. But I mean, maybe not in like my next book release, because that would only be like a week from now. But the time after that, maybe hit me up.
Definitely, man. I just wanted to let you know I was thankful, and also to the people who were here live to ask wonderful questions and watch. And the majority of people who will see this, it's on the replay. Leave your comments and favorite parts of it, because there's so many for me. My hand's sore.
And if people have questions or anything for me, if you go to @Django Wexler on Twitter or Blue Sky, that's like the best social media to get in touch with me. Or you can go to my website, djangowexler.com, and there's a contact form there. You can write to me, or it's got information about all the books.
All of that, guys, is down in the description as well. So you don't even have to like try to find it. I've got your back. It is there, except the Blue Sky link. I will put that in there. Django, thank you so much once again, and we'll talk soon. For you guys that tuned in, have a wonderful night or day wherever you're at. And,
thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be here. I'll see you guys another time.
Yes, sir.